Kate Milifalcha. Welcome to Irish Granny Helen. I am very grateful if you are a returning subscriber. Make sure you're subscribed. And I'm thrilled. If you're a new subscriber, I'm shocked you could find me in my little remote corner of YouTube. We have quite a nice group, a nice community here of subscribers. So I'm glad you joined. I hope you'll come back. All kinds of interesting videos because you never know what you get from one day to the next. As with today. So I usually have some big topic, some philosophical, historical, political topic that I'm just, dying to talk about, or an important person, or there's been a current event that's eating at me. But every once in a while, I kind of have a lull in ideas, and that happened this last week. So I started to go through my favorite site when I'm desperate, this month in history. And although it's full of wars and battles, and I don't really like to talk about them so much, it does occasionally spur me on to an idea. And I did have a little political thing in the back of my mind that was bothering me, and I couldn't figure out how to make it long enough to be a worthy video. And then I stumbled on a tidbit of information that provided the outline for this video. So let's talk about the United States Postal Service. So tomorrow, if I do this right, tomorrow is April 3rd, and I don't usually record. I work on every week on Fridays. So tomorrow is April 3rd, and it's the anniversary of the Pony Express. I did the math. I wrote it down. Now I've lost where I put it. I believe it's about 166-year-old. So it's the 166th birthday of the Pony Express. Now, what has that got to do with the Postal Service? Well, I'm going to tell you. And the reason it caught my eye on, this month in history is because I had heard about what happened with the post office in the past couple of weeks. And I find it very disturbing. I write letters, like with a pen and a piece of paper. I send cards to people, and I know that is just archaic. It's like papyrus scrolls. I know that. But I do it anyway. Let me turn on my sunshine light here so I don't go into a dark depression. It's breaking news. It's raining. So I started thinking about this tidbit of news, which was because of the increased price of gas, and we all know why that happened. The post office is now charging a surcharge, an extra amount, to deliver packages. It's just incredible. I mean, I remember when, now I sound like I'm 150 years old. I sound like I'm as old as the Pony Express. I remember when stamps were 3 cents. Okay, or at least 3-cent stamps were a thing. I remember them. Okay, so let's talk about the post office, and that will lead us into the Pony Express. July 26th, 1775, the United States Post Office, that was the official title, was founded by the Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia. At the very beginning of the Revolution, they wanted a venue, an avenue for communication. And the first Postmaster General is my favorite founder, Benjamin Franklin. In 1788, there was put into the Constitution a postal clause. Congress is given the ability, Congress can establish post offices, and postal roads, like the routes, to facilitate interstate communication and to create revenue, is how it's said in the Constitution. In 1792, the Postal Office Department was created by an act of Congress, the Postal Service Act. In 1872, it became a cabinet level department, so the Postmaster General was a cabinet member. In 1970, so 100 years later, they wrote the Post Office Reorganization Act, and it became an independent agency. And this is where it all went. When I was a kid, we got mail twice a day. Just saying. In 1844, Lysander Spooner, and that is a name for the ages, Lysander Spooner decided to compete with the government and to end the government monopoly on the delivery of mail. And he made the American Letter Mail Company with lower rates, faster service between major cities only. But in 1851, he was forced by Congress to shut down, not for any legal reason, but because Congress didn't like a challenge to the monopoly that the government held on mail delivery. In 1844, the Post Office organization owned the first public telegraph lines in the United States. In 1844, they linked Washington and Baltimore. In 1847, they increased it and linked New York City, Buffalo, and Philadelphia. So this was privatized, this telegraph service, except during World War I, when the government took over. In 1942 to 1945, there was a thing called V-Mail, Victory Mail. And this was a special post office delivery service for military mail. The letters were received by the post office, and if they were established to be legitimate military communication, they were converted to microfilm, and then they were reprinted as actual physical on paper mail when they got to their destination. And the idea was to save room for military cargo. So they didn't want to load the hull of battleships full of bags of mail and packages, different, but bags of mail. So they reduced them to the size of microfilm to save room. During the Cold War, the United States Information Agency helped the post office to redesign more patriotic stamps. March 18th of 1971, the employees at the post office had a strike because their wages were poor and their working conditions were terrible. If you notice, we're just kind of quickly going through the year's significant moments in the history of the post office, because everybody knows, what the post office is and basically what it does. These are significant moments, and we'll get to the crux of the issue. The workers were emboldened by the success of the civil rights movement, and they went from New York City to 210,000 workers nationally. So they had just a few people in New York City striking, and it spread like wildfire to 210,000 nationally. But the government didn't give in. There were no concessions from the government. However, it wasn't pointless, because in the process of doing this, they unionized, and the unions became significant. They did eventually get a contract. Nixon signed a law, an act, the Postal Reorganization Act in 1970. And it said the post office was no longer a cabinet level organization. It was now a new separate federal agency that, as of July 1st, 1971, it would be called the U.S. Postal Service. Before that, it was the post office, which clarifies for me why I've been so confused all these years, because occasionally people will correct me, but I know it's called the post office. I am a little late to the information that it was changed in 1971. So this new organization had to be self-financing. That was a real requirement, which it complicated its mandate to also be nationwide, because it was hard to provide the service that it provided, the services it provided all across the country, and still generate income to get surplus, to be completely self-supporting, because they had employees, pensions, and insurance and stuff. So This put the post office in a big bind. In 2006, they passed the Postal Accountability and Enhancement Act, which limited the services the post office could provide. So from that point on, in 2006, they could do nothing new. I'm not sure what they were trying to avoid. I couldn't find a clear explanation that I understood anywhere. This act required the post office to save money for the medical benefits of future U.S. Postal Service retirees. The goal was they were going to set aside $5 billion in the first year and for the first 10 years. And they actually had an extended 50-year plan of setting money aside. But by 6 years into it, they defaulted. The mail was declining in the 2010s. People were using computers. People don't write letters anymore. People don't write thank you notes anymore. And that's just plain rude. In 2012, to meet their payroll and to continue operating, the post office had to default again on the money for the retirees. That happened in August of 2012, September of 2012. In 2014, they defaulted again in August. Summer's a bad time, I guess. And this default continued every month into 2017. They sought congressional relief to remove this obligation to be self-funding and to the obligation to stay out of debt. This didn't get passed until 2022 with the Postal Service Reform Act, which forgave, check this out, a $57 billion debt that the post office was carrying. And it forgave the requirement to set aside money for retirees, and it established time parameters for deliveries. Not sure how that would affect us. And it allowed the post office to be involved in some non-mail services, M-A-I-L. I don't know what that would be. I couldn't figure it out. In 2023, the Postal Service operated 33,641 locations in the United States. Some of these numbers are kind of difficult to wrap your head around. They delivered 127.3 billion packages and pieces of mail in 2022 alone. The Postal Reformation Act of 2022 established a schedule that they would be normal delivery Monday through Friday, mostly normal delivery on Saturday, and Sunday only delivering priority mail and Amazon packages. Sundays and Christmas time, they would operate since 2013, which meant that really at Christmas, between Thanksgiving and Christmas, they operate 7 days a week. They do deliver priority express mail in certain areas for an extra fee. Their peak period, as I said, is Thanksgiving to Christmas, when they deliver 11.7 billion packages and mail. They are one of the largest civilian fleets of vehicles in the world, with more than 235,000 vehicles in 2024. In 2009, and I think this is really crucial, there was nothing up to date who I could find, but in 2009, they used 444 million gallons of fuel, which cost the government, cost the post office $1.1 billion. But for every penny that the price of gas goes up, the Postal Service has to pay another $8 million a year. So our mail delivery is going to be really negatively affected. I think I hear a death knell. That entertainment purposes only. As of 2026, all of the new vehicles they buy will be electric. They have $3 billion from Congress in their budget for that. By 2028, they will have another 66,000 electric vehicles. Rates and policies are set by their board of government. Now, these are 9 people appointed by the president. Oh, great. And they also have to be confirmed by Congress, by the Senate. And then these 9, they pick the Postmaster General. He counts as number 10 on the board. Then all 10 of them pick the deputy postmaster general. He's like the chief operating officer, and he's the final number 11 on the board. The Postal Regulatory Commission, which is separate, it approves or not the rates. But their appointees on that commission are appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate. So it's run like a business. It is part of the executive branch. It has special privileges like eminent domain. The post office can take your land. Like sovereign immunity, they are immune from lawsuits. They can negotiate postal treaties with foreign countries. They're not subject to antitrust laws. They have a monopoly, and then they have all these rules about mailboxes. You can get in really big trouble by putting something in a mailbox that doesn't have a stamp. It's illegal for anyone but the post office to deliver mail to a U.S. postal box. They've gotten no tax money since 1982. Since the 1990s, the Republicans have really wanted to privatize it. So this no tax money thing in 82 was step number one in an effort to force them into a financial corner so they could privatize it, so that a bunch of wealthy Republicans could get richer. No offense. Democrats too. No offense. Trump agrees. He wants to privatize it. There's strong congressional bipartisan opposition to this because they point to the Constitution and say, no, there's nowhere in the Constitution that says Congress is supposed to organize a postal service and they can subcontract and privatize it. That's not how it works. There's a big technical argument about this that I just didn't even get into because it's if this, then that. They said this, they did that. Lunge and parry, fight and fight. And I just. Meanwhile, it is contracted to private firms in some places. Chip away. There are complicated agreements with FedEx and UPS, complicated for me, between FedEx, the Postal Service, UPS, the Postal Service, what can and cannot be delivered. These are competitors to the Postal Service, but they also have contracts with each other for certain services. The Postal Service photographs front and back every piece of mail that goes across their threshold. And then law enforcement can have access to these photographs without any kind of a warrant. So you can imagine from what that means. August 7th of 1775, Ben Franklin founded the United States Postal Inspection Service. This is it's kind of like the Postal Service police force. They were founded to protect the post mail from crime and from criminal misuse. They enforce 200 laws. They can do search and seizure raids anywhere under the auspices of law enforcement for the post office. They're the post office is the second largest civilian employer. In 2023, they had this combination of employees, 525,469 who were professional, full-time, all my life a post office employee, hoping to retire on the post office pension. They had another 115,000 who were non-career. So I'm assuming that means like part-time or temporary or whatever. Talk a little bit about workplace violence. I don't want to get into it too much, but you can't talk about the post office without that coming up. There have been a number of incidents where disgruntled employees with weapons have committed crimes. For the sake of YouTube, I don't want to use the words. And mostly in the 1990s, not all, but mostly, it happened so frequently, it was called going postal. But when you look at the statistics, it's actually a 30% as likely as violence in other workplaces. But for some reason, it got more attention. So this brings us to the Pony Express. I remember the Pony Express being a thing of historical mythology, like not myth, but like part of the lore of the United States. It was like the Boston Tea Party. It was real, but it had a life of its own as a story. It was romanticized. And I was really astonished researching this to find out how recently it was only recently in, well, almost my lifetime, that it was even not discovered, but acknowledged. So in 1848, gold was discovered in California. And in 1850, California became a state. And in 1860, its population had just exploded to 380,000 people, which feels laughable now. And, the Civil War was approaching, and California was becoming in the center of a tug of war between the North and South as a state. And there was this really high demand for speedy delivery of information. They didn't have, this was way west. There wasn't a lot of white people between the government center in the east and the growing West Coast. And here you had this political crisis, growing. So they really needed political documents delivered faster than what was happening. So three guys called William Russell, Alexander Majors, and Bradford Waddell created what they called the Pony Express. They already were in business. All of them were very successful businessmen. They did freighting, like moving freight, and a thing called draying. Draying is transporting shipping containers, taking the whole shipping container from where it lands in the port and then delivering it elsewhere. They already owned 600 employees, 75,000 oxen, thousands of wagons, warehouses. They owned a sawmill, a meat packing plant. Thought that was kind of a bank and an insurance company. So they went to President Buchanan with the idea of the Pony Express. They already held contracts with the government for delivering for the army to the western frontier, and they thought they could for sure get a contract for their idea of expediting the mail by delivering it by horse riders, rather than stagecoaches. They suggested a route from St. Joseph, Missouri to Sacramento. This is 1,900 miles. And that they sketched out the shortest route to get there. They said that they could do it by horse and not by stagecoach. They could deliver a letter in 10 days. Everyone said impossible. So they started out charging a lot of money. At the time, a Postal Service stamp costs 2 cents. They suggested $5 for a half an ounce piece of mail, but they had to bring it down because nobody could afford it. So by the time it got to its final low cost, it was $1 by July of 1861. But it was still 250 times the regular mail when they suggested it. But they did not get the exclusive government contract. There was behind the scenes wheeling and dealing with people who were pals with Congress. And I think that that's the sense I get. I could be wrong, but who knows, they're all dead. But that's my suspicion. So they started in April the 3rd of 1860. In the winter of 1860, in 2 months, they organized, so January and February, it was just barely 1860. They organized, just in 2 months, 80 riders. They created 184 stations, places to stop. They organized 400 horses, several hundred personnel, and Majors, who was the guy who, one of the founders, and I apologize for this little bit of a delay, but I have to read this to you. He was very religious, and so that influenced his choice of riders. And when they finally got their employees all hired, he came up with an oath. And I'm hoping to be able to find this. Okay, let me look at it, look for it, because it's too long for me to copy out by hand. Okay, hang on, because this is hilarious. And people took it, interestingly enough. Okay, here we go. So this is the Pony Express oath that all riders had to take. I, whoever, do hereby swear before the great and living God that during my engagement and while I am an employee of Russell, Majors, and Waddell, I will under no circumstances use profane language, that I will drink no intoxicating liquors, that I will not quarrel or fight with any other employee of the firm, and that in every respect I will conduct myself honestly, be faithful to my duties, and so direct all my acts as to win the confidence of my employers. So help me God. Now, I thought this was more than a little hilarious, and then I realized something, and I'll tell you what I realized here in a second when we talk about riders. So there was a station about every 10 to 15 miles, and at each station the rider would change horses, eat, and put in a special pouch his mail to carry. Now the pouch was called a mochita, a Spanish word that means, I think, backpack or pouch, and it had pockets called cantinas, and they put the mail in a separate pouch within the larger backpack. They put them in the cantina and they'd padlock it. So each bundle of mail was padlocked into this pouch. And it got thrown over the saddle and held down on the saddle by the weight of the rider. So there was no fear of it falling off in a rush. The pack weighed 20 pounds. And the rider was only allowed to carry a revolver and a water sack, so that there would only be 165 pounds on the horse. And therefore, the riders could only weigh 125 pounds. So I probably wouldn't have been allowed to ride for them after the 5th grade. Anyway, they changed riders every 75 to 100 miles. They rode all day and all night till they accomplished their route. And they even crossed central Nevada in winter. There's question about how they got over the Sierra Madres in the winter, but they did. They were paid $125 a month, when a regular job went anywhere between 43 cents to $2 a day. Now, they did ride, technically, they just rode small horses. So technically that's a pony. They were under a certain height and weight because they wanted speed. Their route was between St. Joseph, Missouri, through Oregon and California trails to Fort Bridger, Wyoming, then the Mormon Trail to Salt Lake City, Utah, then to central Nevada to Carson City, over the Sierras to Sacramento. In Sacramento, the mail was put on riverboats to San Francisco or given to other riders who took them to ferries who delivered them closer. The first ever ride was April 3rd, 1860. Happy birthday. And in 10 days, they got to Sacramento, so they successfully did it. They delivered 49 letters, 5 telegrams, and some important documents for Sacramento. The ride began at 7:15 p.m. There was a whole big thing, dignitaries and speeches and all that. The first rider is disputed. They do have the pictures and names of a few riders. I talk a little bit later here about some of them. But the first rider, they think, was a kid called Johnny Fry. So Pony Express only lasted for 18 months. It just got too expensive. Basically, they got bought out because they were broke. They did carry the word of Lincoln's election to the West, and it was done in 7 days and 17 hours. It was referred to as an unrivaled feat of time. Sporadically, they were attacked along the route by Native Americans because they were going through their territory. There was only one time that they were prevented from going at the outbreak of what was called the Paiute Indian War in May of 1860. There were people killed. They burned the station down. They burned 7 stations they attacked, and 16 employees were killed. They stole 150 horses. So you get the impression that the Native Americans were not best pleased with this incursion. Working in the station was really pretty deadly because these things were extremely isolated, really in the middle of nowhere. As far as like white people went, there were no defenses. There was nobody to save you but yourself. If somebody decided to take the whole thing out, then that was not that hard of a job. The Paiute Indian War cost the Postal Pony Express people $75,000 at the time, which would be $2.69 million now. But U.S. troops were called in finally and ended it in June of 1860. So there's a little debate if this is like fake media or if this is the truth. But I thought it was so amusing. And I think this is why they made them take the oath. I can't understand why else they would do it. So they advertised in the newspaper for employees. Employees wanted young, skinny, wily fellows, not over 18 years old, must be expert riders, willing to risk death daily, orphans preferred. Now that may have been non-existent. That may have been a joke. It may have been a hoax that was put in the paper, or it could have been real. That's the funny part, is you really can't tell because that's exactly who they hired. Mark Twain described the typical rider for Pony Express. He wrote a book called Roughing It. If you've never read his book, Roughing It, you should. It's really good. And he wrote this comment about the Pony Express riders. The typical rider was a little bit of a man, but they became oversized heroes of the American West. Not Bill Hickok. That's Wild Bill Hickok. That was untrue. He did some stuff, but he wasn't a rider. Buffalo Bill Cody was said to have been one of their riders, but that's also not verified. There was a guy called Pony Bob Haslam, and there's a photograph of him on Google. He is considered the most brave and resourceful Pony Express rider. Wait till you hear his story. Born in January of 1840 in London, he came to the United States as a teenager. He helped to build the first Pony Express station. He got the run from Friday's station at Lake Tahoe to Buckland Station near Fort Churchill. It was a 75-mile ride east, so he was on the return trip. His best ride was a total of 190 miles. He did 120 miles in 8 hours and 20 minutes while having been shot in the jaw. He did the long leg. He did it such a long ride because the relief rider had already just been killed. There had been a Native American attack, and that's who shot him. And he was also one of the ones who carried Lincoln's address to the West. After the Civil War, he rode for Wells Fargo. He went with Buffalo Bill Cody to negotiate the surrender of Sitting Bull in December of 1890. He died the winter of 1912 at 72 years old in Chicago of a stroke, and he was living in extreme poverty. Buffalo Bill paid for his headstone. Then there was another guy called Jose Zauglatz. He was Hispanic. I think he was from Mexico. He was one out of 3 total Pony Express riders who was killed by Native Americans. Bart Riles was also a Mexican teenager. He had vast knowledge of the Nevada desert. They were thrilled to get him as a rider. He tied himself to the saddle after being wounded in an ambush and was confident that his horse knew the way to the next station. So he passed out on the saddle and died shortly after he got to the station. But the mail went through. In one route, a rider, this is on average, a rider would go 80 to 100 miles, changing horses 8 to 10 times, roughly every 10 miles. They rode at a canter, which is about 10 to 15 miles an hour. They delivered 35,000 letters. They did prove that the northern route, the central northern route, was viable, trying to get the contract from the government, but they didn't get it. And this is where I think graft, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. The contract was given to another guy called Jeremy DeHoot in 1861, different route, because Congress favored it. They liked the Butterfield Overland Mail stage line that he ran, and they were buddies working behind the scenes. The stagecoach king was a guy called Ben Holliday. He bought all of the Pony Express stations, and then the Civil War broke out, and stage lines all shut down. So in 1861, the Pony Express got reduced in March. They only went between Salt Lake City, Utah, and Sacramento, California. In October 26, 1861, the Pony Express closed 2 days after the transcontinental telegraph reached Salt Lake City and connected it to Omaha. In all, they grossed $90,000, but they lost $200,000. It was just a financial failure. It was too costly. In 1866, Halliday, the stagecoach guy, sold Pony Express assets and the Butterfield stage line assets, all the horses, all the Butterfield stagecoaches, the warehouses, they sold everything to Wells Fargo for $1.5 million. In 1869, the Postal Service, the Post Office, put out the first U.S. postal stamp that depicted an historical event. Before this, it was just presidents' faces. And this historical event was the Pony Express. Now, here's what I meant when I said I was really surprised, because I grew up knowing all about Pony Express, and it was just a big thing, But until the 1950s, there was very little research, very little attention, very little was known, not access to documents. Mostly it was a little hearsay and a little folklore in the back of people's minds, but it wasn't significant in American history. But there are a couple of books that helped to change that. And the most accurate one is called The Story of the Pony Express by Mary and Raymond Settle. And it's particularly accurate because they had access to personal documents of the people involved. Then there's another one called Saddles and Spurs by a guy called Roy Bloss. In 1992, the route of the Pony Express became the Pony Express National Historical Trail. And all along it, an act of Congress did it. It goes through 8 states, and all along it, there are sites and little, things that plaques that tell you about it, and museums all along the route. So that's the story of the background of the Postal Service and the Pony Express, which was a very kind of romanticized, I wouldn't call it romantic, but a romanticized moment in the history of the Postal Service. And it's all far more interesting, in my opinion, than email. But, there's a larger conversation to be had. And I just thought we should honor the fact that it's been 166 years since the Pony Express did its first ride on April 3rd tomorrow. So I know, not a burning issue of the moment, but something we could think about, I guess. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you come back. Do all the subscription thumbs, bells, etc., please, because some of us are having a little bit of a hard time being buried, if you know what I mean. That's all I'll say about that. Thanks a lot. Come back soon. Slán go fóill. Sláinte.